Every few seconds, something demands your attention. A notification, a video, a message. The noise is constant. And then it stops. I started noticing small, frustrating patterns in my life. I couldn't stick with a book for more than 10 minutes. I kept reaching for my phone without thinking. My brain felt busy, yet I was accomplishing almost nothing. I began to wonder if I had actually damaged my ability to pay attention. To find out, I designed a stress test for my own brain. Instead of a quick productivity hack, I wanted to isolate the variables by pushing my mind to its furthest limits of stimulation in both directions. Experiment 1 was total deprivation. The rules were strict. No phone, no social media, no music or background noise, no artificial rewards or sugar. Just the basics: thinking, walking, reading, and writing. At first, I felt in control. Removing the noise felt like a temporary relief, and I convinced myself this would be easy. Within a few hours, a deep, physical restlessness set in, feeling much heavier than simple boredom. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, searching for a notification that didn't exist. There was no logic behind the move, just a raw urge. That automatic reach proved my digital behaviors were no longer choices. They had become unconscious, deeply ingrained compulsions. As the day dragged on, the silence became loud. Time seemed to slow down. Basic tasks like reading a single page or sitting still required an agonizing amount of effort. My mind was aggressively searching for a signal it couldn't find. This friction is the result of how dopamine actually works. It isn't a pleasure chemical. It's the chemical of motivation and anticipation. Most importantly, it operates on the principle of relative contrast. This chart illustrates the modern dilemma. When your brain is flooded with high-intensity input every day, your baseline for what feels engaging steadily ratchets upward. Eventually, normal, low-stimulation activities fall completely below the threshold of what your brain considers worth doing. When you suddenly remove all that noise, you're left with this massive, painful gap. Your baseline is still set to high intensity, but your reality is now low intensity. That feeling of friction is the biological experience of withdrawal. But later that evening, a shift began. My thoughts slowed down into a more controlled rhythm. A walk outside started to feel genuinely interesting again. This happened because the brain began to recalibrate its baseline to match the new, quieter reality. We often blame external distractions for our lack of focus, but this day of silence showed me something different. My brain had simply lost its sensitivity to anything that didn't provide a massive, immediate spike. If deprivation was one side of the coin, I needed to see what happened at the other extreme. For experiment 2, I intentionally flooded my brain with maximum, unrelenting input. I kept multiple tabs open, played videos while scrolling social media, turned on every notification, and forced myself to switch tasks every few minutes. Initially, it felt like I was winning. The constant flow of information created a deceptive rush of efficiency, making me feel like I was doing more in less time. That feeling vanished within an hour. My focus shattered. I was starting projects and abandoning them minutes later. My thoughts felt incomplete, like I couldn't hold on to a single idea long enough to finish a sentence. This is the breaking point of cognitive overload. The brain has hard physical limits, and it is simply not designed to process multiple high-intensity data streams simultaneously. This loop shows how the brain degrades. Start, distract, switch, repeat. The faster you cycle, the less effective you become. This is the switch cost. Every jump requires the brain to reset. This constant switching drains your mental battery faster than sustained focus. By the end of the experiment, I felt a heavy mental exhaustion. It's one of the great illusions of modern life, mistaking the feeling of being occupied for the reality of being effective. Feeling that total exhaustion led to a realization. The chaotic, overloaded state of experiment 2 wasn't actually an extreme. It was a slightly intensified version of my everyday life. So I started experiment 3. This wasn't about testing my limits. It was a protocol designed to reverse the damage I had observed. I set strict rules for rebuilding my attention, one task at a time, timed blocks of 50 minutes, phone physically removed from the room. The early resistance was intense. My brain fought the silence and begged for an escape. Sitting with a single task felt physically uncomfortable, as if my mind was struggling to fit through a narrow opening. This friction occurs because years of conditioning have turned distraction into the brain's default state, making sustained focus feel biologically unnatural. However, the brain possesses neuroplasticity, the ability to adapt based on repeated behavior. It physically strengthens the patterns you use most. If you train for constant switching, you become restless. If you train for sustained attention, you become stable. If a state of restlessness can be learned, then clarity and stability can be actively retrained. As the days of single tasking progressed, the internal resistance began to fade. Deep work started to feel natural. Tasks got finished. My thinking became clearer, moving from a state of chaotic stimulation to one of calm, deliberate control. The work itself didn't get any easier. Instead, my brain had physically adapted to handle the sustained load of a single objective. I realized my brain was never broken or missing some motivation gene. It was simply perfectly trained for a high-noise environment. Focus behaves less like a fixed trait we're born with and more like a muscle, one that requires deliberate, continuous resistance to grapple.